But for those, a lot of you will know who we are in the Regenerative Culture and Wellbeing Working Group. For those who don't, we're basically the part of Extinction Rebellion Northern Ireland, and indeed Extinction Rebellion worldwide, that tries to keep that ethos of care really at the center of everything, you know, non-violent and really deep care for the self, for each other, for community, and then for the planet. So that rather than running off the edge of a cliff and burning out with activism, we try to take care of each other and make sure we're doing it in a manner that isn't burning us out as people and in our lives, and with all our obligations with family and so on, and also doing it in a spirit of hope really and love. So we spread, and our ideas and hopes spread very widely. So one of the things we do and have done over Zoom, and it's been a bit of a lifesaver really, is hold these talks. So we've had a number of different talks, invited people along to give talks on various matters. So we've had, you know, beaver rewilding. We've had reducing carbon usage. We've had one on women's rights and earth rights, and one on mental health. They're just a sort of spread of some of them. So we're really keen to try to just spread the ideas of anything that help us, and anything that can help us create a path as individuals and communities out of the mess we're in, really, the planetary crisis that we are in. So if anyone out there, any of you or any of your friends are interested, please do come along. You can just pop along to one of our meetings, see what we're up to. If you want to join and come regularly, that's wonderful. If you're a Facebook person, you'll find all our details on Extinction Rebellion NI Facebook page. If, like me, you're a wee bit Facebook averse, then you can just email us. I'll ask Angela, who's our wonderful Zoom wizard tonight, to put up the Extinction Rebellion email. So you can just email and we'll put you on the email list, and you'll hear about all the meetings that way. And we promise we don't bombard you with emails. We just don't do that, because that's just another pressure we can all do without. And it's a very supportive group. And what I would say is that if any of you are suffering from climate anxiety, and a lot of us are, this actually helps. It helps to be in a group and a community who are trying to do something about that. So on to tonight. And obviously this topic is so important. We can't overstate it really, because we have to learn how to change our way of life, and how are we going to create a new way of life and a new future. And housing is central to that. We all know that the way we're living now, you know, I'm sitting in a house in Belfast, and there's a big ass oil boiler out the back, and it doesn't make me feel comfortable. And a lot of us are feeling like that and trying to find a way out of that. So something like this initiative is really important, and I understand it's the first one here in Northern Ireland, which makes it even more important. So Faye and Tyrone are going to take us through this. They're going to present everything. I would ask if you have any questions. We will have a good space for questions and answers if you hold them. If you want to put them in the chat, do, but in general, we'll try to wait till they have a chance to give their presentation, and then we'll get to the questions, okay? And I do promise that we will finish for 8:15, because I know we all get that Zoom weary feeling, so we don't want to do that to all of you. We want you to have a good inspirational night. So Faye and Tyrone, over to yourselves, and very welcome.
Yes, hello. So just thanks very much for inviting us along, and thank you everybody for turning up. So Faye and I are going to share the presentation between us. I'll just start off by talking a little bit about what brought me to co-housing. I was very fortunate some years ago to take a trip sailing around the world. And when we were going from Panama to Papua New Guinea, everywhere we went was really pretty pristine. And then we arrived in Borneo, and the waters were polluted. The waters near the coast were so dirty that I got ill just from swimming in it. There were no fish. We caught fish all across the Pacific Ocean. When we got to Borneo, there were just no more fish to be caught. If you went into the market, they were all just minnows. And you could see all the fish traps around the coast and these swarms of rather dirty small fishing boats. And then inland, where we went, Borneo was just one big palm oil plantation, where they'd cut the jungle down to produce palm oil, which actually I think a lot of it goes to create our eco diesel, so-called, and a lot of it also goes to New Zealand, where there are farmers who are now producing their cattle in sheds and feeding them on palm oil plants rather than grass. So that was a really big. I mean, I've always been ecologically orientated, but that was a real shock to me. And I think one other thing that really struck with me from the trip was some of the communities we visited, you know, across the Pacific, in the likes of Fiji and French Polynesia, where there was an amazing cohesion in the village culture there that, you know, I think we've lost a lot of in the West. So when I got back to Northern Ireland, we had a little group and we started to try and create a co-housing project, and that group went on for about a year, and we didn't manage to get anything started from that. And then later on, this group that started Portaferry Cohousing started some years after that. So Faye, could you pop on to the next slide? So what we're going to do this evening, I'll talk a bit about what co-housing is and the history of it and the history of our group getting started. Faye will go through the values and decision making and the site layout that we have at the minute, and governance and membership, and then I'll talk about our financial model. Sorry, governance, membership's me, and the financial model. So first of all, what is co-housing? So it started in Denmark in the 60s, and I think about 5% of housing in Denmark is now in co-housing projects, and it's spread from there, you know, across Europe. There are about 30 projects in the UK, none in Ireland. There's one other group that we know of trying to get started in the south. And then there's projects in America, Australia, New Zealand, all small numbers all over the world. And the main principles of it, it's primarily a community-based project. So all projects will have a communal house. There'll be some aspect of people getting together, and maybe weekly or more than that, for shared meals. The site will be designed to be user-friendly. So it's designed so that people naturally interact in the process of life itself. The development will ideally be, the residents will have a part in designing the site, and then in managing it once it's up and running. And then all the decision making is all consensus based. As well as that, in our group, there's a very strong kind of sustainable aspect to it as well. I think that's most co-housing groups that have that, but not all of them. And there's a few pictures of, there's 3 sites there in the UK, on the bottom right one in America. I visited the one in Threshold, top left. It was very nice, smallish site out in the countryside. Yeah, as far as we know, all the projects in the UK that got up and running are still running successfully. So a little bit about our group. So there's been a couple of initiatives in Northern Ireland running back 10 years. And And there's real difficulty with getting a co-housing project started, because you kind of need a group of people that can get together and agree on a site and have the capital to fund it. So it's very difficult to find a big enough group of people with enough capital to put that together. And most of the projects in the UK, as far as we understand, were put together like that. Sometimes groups of friends, or sometimes bringing in other people. Some of them were started by an individual, like a property developer almost, building the project and then bringing people in as they go along, which is not kind of ideal because you're losing some of the group participation in it. So what happened with us was we weren't really being able to get enough people with capital there to get things to take off. So 3 of us got together and we decided what we would do is we would buy a site between the 3 of us and then expand the group and bring people in as as soon as they were ready to join in the all the process, doing the design together and so on. So we bought our site in Portaferry. We spent about 18 months looking for it and putting in an offer, and we finally got hold of it at the beginning of last year. Yes, last year. And we've been working then for a year, working to bring things forwards. Yeah, I think that's me. Over to you, Faye.
Thanks, Jerome. So very briefly on how I've come to co-housing. So I have spent most of my career working in various countries in Africa and very low resource settings, generally mainly rural. And I've been involved in a number of community-led initiatives and really seen how people can make things happen, and that the systems that we're all depending on in wealthier countries to keep us fed and clothed and warm and moved around the place are actually probably a lot more fragile than we would think. And I see community as very much central to any efforts to try and address the challenges that we all know are here and are going to increase with what's happening in the world. So I had been looking for something like this project for a number of years, but I wasn't familiar with the term co-housing. And I just stumbled across the group when I was doing a permaculture design course in Cloughjordan in Tipperary that some people may know. And I was just delighted to find that people were so far ahead in this project and had taken this amazing step of already purchasing the land, this kind of leap of faith. That has been such a barrier, as Tyrone mentioned, for other groups. So that's how I came to be involved. It was I only became involved in July, and now it's become. I mean, I have a very busy life. I have a full-time job. I still work for the International Development and Humanitarian Organization charity that I was working for in various parts of Africa. I have 2 small children, and so I don't have a lot of time, but I just, I'm very willing to put all the time that I can take into this because I have such a belief that this is a model, hopefully, that we can show a different way of living. And this can hopefully spark other people to take a similar step. So I'm going to start with a little bit about our values. I think these are great, and these underpin how we work together. We have obviously not yet moved into the site, but we try to live these values in how we relate to each other. So the group meets weekly on Zoom, and I can tell you it's a much more respectful and collaborative dynamic than sometimes in my own workplace. We are careful to listen to each other and consider each other's views, and Also, we consider the views of people outside of the project, such as our neighbours, and those people who are going to be around. And we use a model of consensus decision making, which I'll show on the next slide. The project is also very outward looking, which is another thing I think is a real strength. So we're not trying to create a little utopia for ourselves, and we want to engage with the wider community and try to spark other people to take steps too. We've also learned a lot from existing co-housing projects in other parts of the British Isles, and that's been incredibly useful. People have been generous with their time in helping us, recognizing that this is the first one for this part of the world. So this, this graphic, I'm by no means an expert on consensus decision making. I'm very much learning, but I like this graphic as it explains it very simply and clearly. So basically, consensus is about recognizing what your preference is within a larger range of tolerance. So a simple example, if I want to go for a day out, I want to go to the beach is my preference, but if other people wanted to go for a walk in the mountains, then that's within my range of tolerance. So I'm fine with it, and I accept the decision of the group. So everyone gets to state their preference and is encouraged to understand and articulate their range of tolerance. So if people have an objection, then that needs to be rooted in something that affects them very deeply. So to use the previous example, if say I had hay fever and the walk is in a meadows and there's a high pollen count day, then I might say, look, I'm going to have a miserable walk if we choose to go for a walk. So the group may then go, okay, well, that's a valid objection. Let's consider that, and we may all go to the beach. So just a simple example of work consensus and how it would work. In my limited experience, making decisions like this is much easier when everyone is able to see the difference between what they prefer to happen and what they really need to happen. And it also gets much easier where there is high trust in the group. And it also, I think, gets easier the more times that you do it. So in our meetings, people will regularly say things like, this decision is not one that I have a strong feeling about, so I'm happy to go with the group's preference. We've had a lot of discussions about whether to have a kind of backstop, like a more sort of quantitative way of taking decisions, but so far we haven't needed to do that. So now I'll get to the fun bit, which is the looking at the site. So the first, I'm hoping this will work. It worked when we practiced. The first slide I'm going to show you is some drone footage of the site itself. So fingers crossed this works. Please give me a thumbs up if you can see it moving. Yeah, excellent. Is it actually moving though? It's not moving on my screen. No, okay, let's see it. Let's see. Is that working now?
So the site is the kind of big field at the bottom of the screen, and then that little one just to the right, up and to the right of it, with all the rushes in it. So it's those two bits of field.
So you can see that Portaferry is very easily walkable, cyclable from the site. There aren't very many mature trees on it, and the biodiversity is quite minimal at the moment. We have had an ecologist look at the site as part of the planning application. Can I just check that it did move? You were able to see the move. Great. Okay. Oops. Okay, so this slide better shows the boundaries of the site. It slopes slightly to the north, which for those of you familiar with permaculture or growing in general is not great, but we've taken this into account in the site design. We have residential neighbours to the west and the south of the site. And I understand that it's been used for cattle grazing for several years, but is zoned for development in the Portaferry plan. So this next slide shows one of the current iterations of the design. So I'm going to keep this slide up for quite a long time, and if at the end of what I say you have questions about any element of the site, please feel free to ask them, and if someone could help me with any questions that go into the chat, because I can't see the chat at the moment.
Yeah, we can do that. In fact, just ask them, we can't make that bigger, can we?
I mean, I could zoom, I actually don't know. I don't know. I'm worried about touching it because when I touched it before, it all went a bit strange.
Oh, okay.
It's, I'm hoping this won't cause any problems. Does that actually make it bigger? Does that cause more problems? No.
That's a wee bit bigger, I think.
Is it? I mean, it's the detail in here, I guess, is not so much what we need to get into. It's more just us. I want to describe the kind of thinking that's gone behind the design. So as Tyrone mentioned, yeah, you don't worry about the landscaping key up in the corner, because I'll talk you through the different sections here. So excuse me, as Tyrone mentioned, co-housing is about designing for community. So you can see the common house, which is the large building at the entrance, and it's next to a children's play area. So the idea being that children can be seen by parents when they're talking, cooking, eating in the main house. So the idea is to design for interaction. So all the houses are clustered near the common house, and this leaves a lot of green space for rewilding, growing food, and just enjoying. That's very different to a more traditional development. So we're currently in the process of working out what the common house will contain, and we're trying to balance the needs of the group and the wants of the group. We will definitely have a large kitchen and dining space, a storage area, reception, reception area, and bike parking. And we have different wants, and we're trying to work those out. So we would like to have some accommodation in the common house. So that would be for anyone who's coming to visit, somebody who lives in the co-housing project. That means that the rest of us can keep our houses small. We don't need to have a guest room for someone to come, and that mostly stays empty. We would also like to have a kids' playroom, co-working space, a library, and there's some other things on our list too. But obviously, we'll come up against the reality of cost at some point on this, so we will keep this list prioritised. The car parking, as Tyrone mentioned, that's a key tenet of co-housing, is that the cars are minimised in the site. So you can just about see the slightly paler blocks to the right-hand side. Those will be where the cars are parked. So you come in, if you come in by car, you get out of your car and then you interact with the rest of the site on foot, primarily. There are planning rules on car parking spaces, some people may be familiar with. We hope to share cars and to have electric vehicle charging points so that individual car ownership will be minimized. So you can also see there are some smaller structures around the car parking area on the east of the site, and these are storage and workspaces. So we have some people in the group, including Tyrone, who are makers, builders, creators, and that space is for people who want it. And we also plan at least one polytunnel, and we hope to have a greenhouse on the south-facing walls, which will enable us to grow things all year round. The houses themselves then are going to be on either side of a pedestrianised pavement that will be wheelchair accessible. So actually, we've recently made a change to the design. We're only going to have one road running to the northeast, and the houses will come together on either sides of that. I'm calling it a road, but it's not a road for vehicles. because we want to create that sense of cohesion across the houses. Now, obviously, we have to have vehicular access to the houses for emergency vehicles, service vehicles, if someone is moving a big piece of equipment or something. But we hope to minimize that as much as possible. So the houses are a mix, detached, 1, 2, 3, perhaps even 4 bedrooms. Some of them will only be on one floor. We plan to do the construction in phases, depending on the number of people who are ready to build. And Tyrone will talk about this later. We haven't finalized the design of the houses, but we know that they will be built to a very high standard. We're hoping to go for a passive house standard, although we won't necessarily be pursuing passive house certification. For those who are familiar with that, there's quite a lot of details that entails that are beyond just around insulation. They will be to a very high standard of insulation. And we will have features like solar panels, depending on what's affordable. The houses themselves are oriented to maximize passive solar gain, so larger windows to the south and smaller to the north, for example. We did, before somebody asks, we did check the site for wind generation, as I understand it. This was before I joined the group, but one of the founding members, along with Tyrone, is a renewable energy engineer, but apparently the potential of the site is too low to make it feasible. So just to draw your attention, the houses to the south there that are in a kind of beige color are going to be traditionally developed and sold as sites or as one parcel of land to a developer. And this will help the people who invested in the land to recoup some of the cost and can also help to fund the development of the site and the common house. And Tyrone again will mention that later on. So the last feature I want to point out is the trees around the periphery. We will plant lots and lots of trees over the site, but we can't really plant within the main part of the site yet because we are doing the construction. And anyone familiar with construction knows that tiny little trees don't survive long amongst big pieces of machinery. But we will plant all around the edges. We currently have, I think it's 1,400 trees, Tyrone, yeah. We also got a grant for that of 3,500 over several years to purchase and look after those trees. And so that's all native varieties, oak, willow, birch, rowan, cherry, hawthorn, blackthorn, etc. And so these trees will form a belt around mainly the north and east perimeter of the property. And we will also be, we're planning a multi-layer food forest with fruit and nut trees interplanted with shrubs and ground cover plants, many of which will have edible and medicinal uses along the easternmost boundary there. So yeah, we're planting those trees in March. We may well be asking for some help, so that would be appreciated. We'll give some details at the end for those who want to learn more. So at this point, if there are any questions on the site while we have the plan up, I'm happy, Tyrone and I can take some questions. But if your question relates to something else, then maybe wait until the end. If there's nothing.
Can you say anything, Faye, about what shape the central house will be or what it will include again? Maybe I missed that.
Say again, the shape of the common house?
Yeah, or how big it's going to be. You've mentioned the kitchen and the dining area.
Yeah, so it's quite interesting actually. So there's obviously quite a history of co-housing, and we're learning from that. And over the years, it seems that the individual houses in co-housing projects have become a little bit smaller, and the common house has become a little bit bigger. Tyrone, can you remember the square meters of the current design?
I think it's about 400 at the minute. Yeah, so you know, that's quite big, like a normal smallest 3-bedroom house would be about 100 square meters. So yeah, fair size.
There are a couple of questions in the chat, Faye. Shall I read them to you?
Please, yeah, I don't see it at the moment.
So David has asked, how many acres is the site and how many dwellings, individual houses are planned?
So the site is 13 acres and it's 32 houses at the moment. We will cover the timeline. We are in process of developing a planning application with an architect, and we hope to submit that spring time.
Great. And there's another question that you may or may not want to take now. I'm curious about the distance to the ferry and other transit.
Tyrone, you're probably best to answer.
Yeah, it's about 10 minutes walk to the ferry, about 5 minutes walk to the bus station. And just on the number of houses on the site, so the kind of consensus around co-housing is that projects work best if they're from sort of 12 households up to about 35. The idea being that if they're too big, then you kind of lose that social cohesion. And if they're too small, then if there's 1 or 2 people who don't get on that well with each other, it has too much impact. So big enough that they can accommodate, you know, some people not being that compatible with each other. And I think that's the general advice. I mean, we were really looking for sites for around the smaller end of that, and then this one came up, so we just grabbed it.
Thanks, Tyrone. And there's just one more question. From Teresa, will any houses have a driveway for a disability car?
Tyrone?
Yes. So some of the houses are next to the parking area. So the idea is, yes, so some of the houses will be just right on the parking area, and then some of them will be further away. And we do have a couple of parking spaces adjacent to the disabled parking spaces adjacent to the common house.
That's great. Thanks. Those were the questions for now.
Sorry, can I just ask just one more wee question? I'm just interested about the beige houses being, did you say they're being sold to a developer to develop, or is that part of the whole project?
No, that's separate to the project. So that was a kind of very pragmatic, practical decision to try and recoup some of the cost of the land.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So basically we've got 13 acres and roughly 10 acres of that is the co-housing, and roughly 3 acres is being sold off separately.
Tyrone, I think that's me done on that slide. Shall I move on to the legal?
Okay, yeah, shoot on to the next slide. So this is our legal structure. So at the moment, the site is owned by the 3 of us, myself, Andrew, and Lynn, who are a couple. So really the idea is to get the site and the project owned by the members as soon as possible. And our way we're going about this is we're setting up a limited liability company, Portaferry Cohousing. We're just working on that in the group at the moment, and you know, deciding the rules and how it's going to work. So the Portaferry Cohousing will own the common house and all the communal land, which is probably about half of the site. And the individuals then in the project will own their own house, you know, outright freehold, and they will between them, they will own Portaferry Cohousing. So we have 32. We have 32 sites, 32 houses in the project. So here's, so the owners of the individual houses in the project will own Portaferry Cohousing, but also other people who are residents will also be owners of Portaferry Cohousing. So, you know, the idea is to make it as democratic as possible. If the company winds up, then the assets will go to the owners of the houses, or the people who've invested in it. But otherwise, all the residents, whether they be owners or tenants, because we do hope to have some rental houses, will be, you know, there'll be directors and owners of Portaferry Cohousing. So in a way, the running of the project will then be done by that group of members. So in some ways, it's a little bit like what you might have with a management company running a block of flats, except in this case, the management company is owned by the residents. And obviously there'll be, you know, there'll be costs to keeping the project going, you know, insurance, rates, you know, running costs for the common house. But we would expect those to be moderate, because we will try and do as much of the maintenance on the site as we can ourselves. You know, I'm sure we'll have some well-skilled people in all sorts of different areas. Yeah, so that's the legal model, and then next we'll go on to the financial model. So the first phase of the financial model was buying the site. So that was Andrew, Lynn and myself, and the site cost us 322k, which is pretty cheap for a development site. But you know, Portaferry is not the most expensive area. If we were across the Narrows in Strangford, it would be more than double that. So that was phase one of the finance. Phase two of the finance is to get us up to planning. So our main costs for that have been the architect and the planning application fees, and our legal assistance to set up the company. So we're budgeting 68k for that, and we're in the middle of that stage at the moment. So we are meeting that partly from, we will have membership fees as soon as the company is formed. It's not formed yet, of £1,000. And then we will have to raise the rest of that between us. And, you know, some of us have some capital to put towards that. We can't really borrow anything at this stage, because it's really difficult to borrow against land. I mean, we looked at it and it's just not viable to borrow at this stage until we have planning approval. And then stage three is when we get to the development stage, once we get planning approval. So then things completely change for us. So it is eminently possible to borrow a lot of money against the site once we have planning approval. So what we're looking at from people coming into the project who want to have a house would be to ask them to put up 10% of their property costs in advance, you know, just like you would with a normal build or a normal purchase. And then we can borrow the rest of the money from a commercial lender, You know, and there are some lenders that specialize in eco projects or in co-housing projects such as ours. You know, we've had discussions with them so far, and that all looks good. Somebody coming in to have a house in the project, they would need to put up 10% of the development cost of the house. The Portaferry Cohousing would borrow the rest of the money, and then when their house is completed, they could pay it off or take out a mortgage on it. And we are looking to keep the houses as moderately priced as we can. The target is about 140k for a 3-bedroom house. You know, whether we can meet that you know, I mean, there's been a huge inflation in building costs recently, but that's the target. And it's helped by the fact that the site has cost us really such a moderate amount.
Do you want to talk about how we're trying to make rental available for people? I've had some questions on that.
Yeah, do you want to say a bit about that?
Me? Well, it's what we want to try and do is enable people to live in the project if they want to live in the project and they're committed to co-housing. And for some people, it might be difficult to raise a mortgage. So we're at the moment we're looking at whether people who are going to live are going to fund a build in some way. It can also fund an additional build that will be available to rent. And one of the kind of principles we've used in looking at the governance model is that there will be equality between people who are renting and people who own in terms of decision making about the project. So I think, you know, we come down to the kind of the money at some point. That's what it's going to come down to. You know, we're going to need other people to fund these houses if people aren't able to fund them themselves. But we do really want to make that happen if we can.
Yeah, and I mean, this is part of also where selling part of the site comes in, because you know, my hope is that if we can raise some capital for that can be invested into the project, and you know, if we're going to have houses that we're going to rent, then somebody needs to pay for their construction costs. So that's one way of accommodating that.
Shall I move to the timeline?
Yeah, so we just go to the timeline. Yeah, so we're in 2022 at the minute. So we've been working with the architect's Murray Bell. We picked him because he has a special interest in community projects, and he would be one of Northern Ireland's top eco house designers. And he has just been great with us. He's been so helpful and enthusiastic about the project. He's been wonderful. This was drawn up about a year ago. Will we make planning application in spring? Tight. We might be summer, but you know, we're well on the way. The estimate is 18 months to get planning approval. Who knows, could be less, could be more. And then target is to start building in 2024, and build time for a phase could be 12 months, might be a bit less for individual houses. I think it's only 6 to 12 months for build. Yeah, that's the timeline. I can't remember, Faye, is that us finished?
Yeah, that's our last slide.
Our last slide, so we can take questions for 25 minutes. There was one there. Will there be any bungalows? So shall I take that one?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so the mix of houses, I can't quite remember off the top of my head, but I think there's something like eight 1 beds, 8 2 beds, 8 3 beds, something like that, and a few 4 beds. So the 1 beds and 2 beds are bungalows, and the 1 beds are quite small. I think we've got, Murray had them at 42 square meters. So yes, there will be bungalows.
And there's also, you know, people who are at this point in or people who are part of the group will have a lot of freedom about what their house, what size their house is. It's not going to be imposed, and there will be some, stylistically, there will be some coherence across all of the houses. But obviously the interior is up to the people who can live in them.
Tyrone, in fact, thank you very much. I have a question I'll maybe just put in while other people are ruminating on what they might like to ask.